In this video, I'll be replacing the Serpentine drive belt in my Pathfinder. I'm using a Gates Micro V K070873, which I picked up from Rock Auto. And you are also going to need a few sockets, notably an 8mm and a 10mm. And you're also going to need a 3/8 inch drive ratchet. So you can see the belt right there, and you can see the tensioner pulley down deeper. So it doesn't have a bolt on the end, it has a square cutout, and that's where you put your 3/8 inch drive ratchet. You're going to need to take off the air ducting between the filter housing and the throttle body. You're going to need to take off one vacuum hose, and you're going to need to take off the engine cover. So to take off the plastic engine cover, I'm just going to use a 10mm deep socket, and there are only 2 bolts that hold it in place. Pretty simple, just take the 2 bolts out, set those aside. Once the bolts are off, you can see there's 2 rubber grommets that really hold that engine cover on there, but just lift it straight out and it'll pop out. So you can see one grommet and the second one, and then just attach to those 2 mounting points. Now to remove the vacuum hose, I'm just using a pair of pliers, loosening the clamp, and then detaching the hose. Now I'm using the 10mm again, and there are 2 bolts that hold the ducting in place. So I'll remove those, and then once those are out, I'm going to use the 8mm to loosen these hose clamps. I end up loosening both of the hose clamps on this side, and on the air filter side, same thing, 8mm. Only on the air filter side, I only remove the 1 hose clamp. So you see it just pulls straight back, and then on the air filter side, it just pulls straight out. So you get a better look of the belt tensioner right there. And just a point of note, I don't replace the belt tensioner. You can see the square cutout where the socket's going to go. Now at this time, I do take the negative battery terminal off the battery, and that's because I don't think you can do this without getting your hands right down into the fan, so I want to ensure that the fan doesn't turn on. Even though that's unlikely, I think it's better safe than sorry. So you can see the ratchet in there. Like I said, it's a 3/8 inch drive. You just turn the ratchet in a counterclockwise manner, and it'll loosen the belt up enough for you to take it off one of the pulleys. Doesn't really matter which one. Once the belt's removed from one of the pulleys, it's quite simple to remove the belt from all of the other pulleys. In this case, I removed the belt from the power steering pump first, and then all of the other pulleys thereafter. For the removal, it is a little bit more difficult to get it from around the air conditioner compressor and the crankshaft pulley, but once you get your hands down there, it's not too bad. So I'll try and get a diagram in here as well, just to make it a little easier to see, but right down at the bottom you can see I've got the belt around the crankshaft pulley. Then I have one strand coming around the air conditioner compressor and the other going around the fan pulley. The order that I put things on were the crankshaft first, then I did the air conditioner compressor, and then sort of the fan pulley concurrently as I worked my way up. Then I went around the tensioner and the idler concurrently, then the power steering pump. The very last thing that I did was actually the alternator, which is the small pulley that is on the lower left hand side. It became too difficult to get the ratchet onto the tensioner when it was around all of the pulleys, and it just was easier for me to do the alternator as the last pulley with the tension taken off the tensioner. You can see here I'm kind of fumbling around with it for a second, trying to figure out how to get the tensioner down, trying it by hand, and it's very difficult to get the ratchet back on with it around all the pulleys. So my big recommendation is not to do it the way I did initially, but to do it the way I did later, and that is to do the alternator pulley last. So you can see now everything's set up to do it sort of the easiest way that I found possible, and that is to do the alternator last. All that's left to do is get the socket back onto the tensioner pulley, take the tension off, and get it around that alternator pulley. So you can see everything's in place now. You can see it comes around the idler and tensioner pulleys. You can see it going around the fan pulley, which is the other smooth pulley, and then way at the bottom you can see it going around the crankshaft pulley. A little bit more difficult to see the air conditioner compressor pulley just because it's so dark down there, but it also goes around there. One thing to note, this is really only applicable to this V6 model. If you have a V8, it's different. If you have a different year, basically a 2013 or newer, it's different. So you see the old belt's actually not in terrible condition. It's got 200,000 kilometers on it. I'm just going to save it as a spare belt. But I picked this belt up when I did the last job just because the shipping was sort of free because I was getting the box mailed anyway. So now I'll put the air intake ducting on before I start the vehicle and give it a test run. So again, I'll use the 8mm on the mechanical hose clamps on both the air filter and the throttle body side. And then there are 2 bolts that go in that secure it on the top, and those are both 10mm bolts. I have no torque spec on any of these bolts, but just snug is what I went for. And the last thing I do before starting the vehicle is get this one vacuum hose on, and just using the pliers again to get the vacuum hose clamp back in place. Obviously, in order to start the vehicle, I'll have to get the negative battery terminal back on, and then we'll start it up and make sure that it runs. Now, when I called the dealership locally here in Ontario, they quoted me between $90 and $100 to buy a new belt and 1 hour of labor to get the job done. So their total quote was between $220 and $250, and that does not include tax. So you got to add about $25 here in Ontario. So that would be approximately $250 to $275. I picked up the belt from Rock Auto for what would be $12.86 American. Once I did shipping and exchange rate to Canada, it was $32.75 delivered right to my door with a few other parts. So the total DIY savings on this is about $240, give or take a little bit, and you don't really need any special tools other than a socket set to do this. And the last thing I'm going to do is put the plastic engine cover back on. And before I did that, I brought it inside to the sink and cleaned it up just so I didn't get caught slipping out here in Ontario. Anyway, I found that this job was actually pretty easy. A little bit of a pain to get the belt around the crankshaft and the air conditioner compressor, but once that was done, it was pretty smooth sailing. So I feel you could probably do this in about 1 hour if you were doing this yourself for the first time. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.